Welcome in, everyone. We are so glad you are here today for another deep dive.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. We've got a really fascinating one lined up today.
We really do. But before we jump into things, I just want to say, if you love getting these shortcuts to becoming well-informed, make sure you hit subscribe on the BookSnap channel.
Yeah, hitting subscribe is basically the easiest way to make sure you never miss out. We've got so many incredible deep dives coming your way.
Exactly. All right, so I want to start by asking you a question. Have you ever felt completely, crushed by the weight of your own goals?
Oh, man. I feel like we all have.
Right. You know that feeling where no matter how much you genuinely want to change, you wake up highly motivated, you make this grand plan, and then by Thursday, you're right back at square one.
Yeah, and you're just left feeling guilty and exhausted.
Totally exhausted. But what if the secret to transforming your life wasn't about trying harder, but actually trying less?
Which sounds completely counterintuitive.
It does. But what if your biggest failures weren't a lack of willpower at all? What if it was just a simple design flaw in how you approach change? Today, we are unlocking a method that changes everything by shrinking it down.
Yeah, we are basically looking at a complete overhaul of how human behavior functions.
Right. So our mission today is to explore the behavioral psychology behind BJ Fogg's concept of tiny habits.
Such a great framework.
It really is. We're going to look at a highly practical, realistic approach to building lasting routines that entirely bypasses the need for massive willpower. We want to prove that tiny, gradual shifts lead to massive, sustainable results.
Which is huge because we really have to start by dismantling the way society falsely glorifies radical change.
Oh, absolutely. The whole go big or go home mentality.
Exactly. We are constantly sold this idea of the massive overnight transformation, but behavioral science paints a completely different picture. Today, we're going to look at why small and fun consistently beats big and perfect.
Okay, so if we are constantly failing at these massive overnight transformations, the logical conclusion is that the tool we're using, willpower, must just be the wrong tool for the job.
It is entirely the wrong tool. I mean, relying on willpower is basically the primary reason most self-improvement attempts fail.
Wait, really? The primary reason?
Yeah, we have this deeply ingrained myth that willpower is a character trait. Like you either have it or you don't.
Right. You just think, oh, I'm just lazy.
Exactly. But biologically speaking, willpower is just a cognitive function. And it's a highly limited, highly volatile resource.
So it's heavily dependent on our physical state.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Willpower is managed by your prefrontal cortex, which is the logical, decision-making part of your brain. And, well, that part of the brain is an absolute energy hog.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, your willpower constantly fluctuates based on your mood, your stress, how much sleep you got, even your blood sugar levels. Every time you make a decision, you're burning through that energy.
It honestly makes me think of willpower like a phone battery.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, like if you wake up fully charged, sure, maybe you can force yourself to go for a run, but throughout the day you're dealing with traffic, stressful emails, and making 100 tiny decisions.
Right, and the battery is just draining.
Exactly. Why do we rely on something to change our entire lives when it's literally guaranteed to hit 1% by the time we get home from work?
Yeah, you wouldn't start a massive system update on a dying battery.
No, because the system would just crash.
Precisely. When you set giant goals, like telling yourself, I am going to work out for an hour every single day, you are demanding a massive amount of battery power.
And then you inevitably run out of juice.
Right, and your prefrontal cortex essentially gives up. It hands control back to the basal ganglia, which runs your autopilot. You just default to your old, easy habits.
Which causes that immense frustration and guilt we were talking about earlier.
Exactly.
Okay, so if we know the battery's going to die, how do we actually install the new software?
You make the file size smaller. The solution is making the behavior so incredibly small that you simply cannot fail. You strip the requirement for willpower down to almost zero.
So by shrinking it, you bypass the brain's resistance.
Completely. It doesn't trigger that alarm in the prefrontal cortex that says, warning, this is going to take too much energy.
Okay, give me a sense of scale here. How small are we talking?
Microscopic.
Microscopic.
Yes. Let's say your overarching goal is to read more. Don't aim to read a book a week or, even a chapter a day. Your actual goal is to read one single page.
Just one page. That is it.
That is it. Or, if you want to get fit, don't aim for a full gym session. Your only goal is to put on your running shoes and move your body for 5 minutes.
The bar is literally on the floor.
It is. Because the resistance to doing something for 5 minutes is almost non-existent. You don't need a fully charged battery. You just do it.
And I guess once you start, momentum sort of takes over.
Exactly. You often keep going, but the only actual requirement is that tiny action.
Okay, so if willpower is out, the trigger to actually do this tiny action has to come from somewhere else. Because honestly, a 5-minute habit can be really easily forgotten.
Oh, for sure. This brings us to the architecture of habit design.
Okay.
And the most critical mechanism here is called anchoring. In behavioral psychology, this relies on a concept called Hebbian learning. The famous phrase is, neurons that fire together wire together.
Okay, break that down for me. How does that translate to my messy morning routine?
Anchoring is when you deliberately link your tiny new behavior to a daily routine that already exists in your life.
So you're attaching it to something already established.
Right. Think about things you do every single day without fail, like brushing your teeth or starting the coffee maker.
Right. I don't need a sticky note to remember to make coffee.
Exactly. They just happen automatically. So if your new tiny habit is to drink more water, you anchor it to that existing behavior.
Ah, I see.
The rule becomes, immediately after I brush my teeth, I will drink 1 cup of water. Or, right after I push the button on the coffee maker, I will do 2 push-ups.
So you're basically hijacking the momentum of an existing habit to launch a new one.
You've got it.
I mean, I understand the logic of hijacking the routine, but Fogg also talks heavily about positive reinforcement, like celebrating these tiny wins instantly.
Yes, celebration is key.
And I have to be honest, this is where I get incredibly skeptical.
Oh, really? Why is that?
Well, if I pour a glass of water and then give myself a high five or cheer out loud, I'm going to feel ridiculous.
Yeah, that's fair.
Doesn't the brain know it's being tricked? Like, does a fake fist pump actually release the same neurochemicals as achieving a real difficult goal?
It's a very fair pushback, and it does feel deeply unnatural at first.
It really does.
But the science behind this is undeniable. Your brain's reward system, specifically dopamine, operates on immediate gratification. The brain doesn't actually care about the objective societal value of the achievement. It doesn't understand the abstract concept of, like, I'll be healthy in 6 months.
So it only understands right now.
Exactly. It only understands neurochemical shifts in the present moment.
So when I set a huge goal, like losing 20 pounds, the reward is months away, and the brain just gets bored waiting for the payoff.
The brain literally starves for dopamine in the meantime. And dopamine is not just a pleasure chemical, it is a learning chemical.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, its evolutionary purpose is to stamp behaviors into your basal ganglia so you repeat them. When you celebrate immediately, even just by smiling or saying good job to yourself, you manually fire off a hit of dopamine in that exact second.
So you're artificially manufacturing the biological glue that makes the habit stick.
You are. You're generating personal happiness on demand. It tells your brain, hey, whatever we just did right before this good feeling, let's make sure we do that again tomorrow.
That is wild.
The timing of the reward is vastly more important than the magnitude of the accomplishment. Immediate celebration is non-negotiable.
All right, I'll buy into the dopamine hacking, but let's look at the reality of life here.
Okay, let's do it.
We design the habit, we have our anchor, we do our somewhat embarrassing fist pump, but life gets chaotic.
It always does.
What happens on a miserable Tuesday when the dopamine simply isn't flowing and everything goes wrong?
Well, this is where the philosophy completely diverges from traditional self-help. How we handle obstacles is crucial.
So what's the first step?
The first step is fundamentally redefining failure. In this framework, failure isn't a moral shortcoming. It's not a reason for guilt. It is literally just data.
Oh, I really love that framing. Just data.
Exactly.
So instead of deciding I'm just an inherently lazy person, I look at the situation like an engineer. The machine stalled out. Why? Was the friction too high?
That is exactly the mindset you need. If you fail to do your tiny habit, it simply means the habit wasn't designed well enough for that particular circumstance.
Ah, so it needs to be adjusted.
Right. Maybe the anchor was wrong. Maybe the action wasn't tiny enough. The core rule here is that consistency is infinitely more important than perfection.
So if you cannot do your habit on your absolute worst, most exhausting day, it is not a tiny habit.
Precisely.
And what role does our environment play in that friction? Because sometimes it feels like my own house is actively fighting against my new habits.
Environment design is your first line of defense. You have to physically modify your surroundings to reduce resistance.
We want to make the good behavior the path of least resistance.
Exactly. If your goal is that 5-minute morning workout, Leave your running shoes right next to your bed so they are the very first thing you see.
Or if you want to read, put the book right on your pillow.
Yes. Or physically unplug the television to remove distractions.
But, let's say I've done the environment design. The running shoes are staring at me from the side of the bed.
Right.
I can still sit there and write a mental dissertation on why I actually need 20 more minutes of sleep.
Oh, of course.
Even with a clear path, that internal friction is real.
It is, and the brain is an incredibly skilled lawyer when it comes to conserving energy.
That is the truth.
To bypass that, the research suggests a brilliant interrupt mechanism. The 5-second rule.
The 5-second rule.
Yeah, when you decide to do your tiny habit, you must start the physical action within 5 seconds of that decision. You literally count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you move.
So it's essentially a manual override for the prefrontal cortex.
Exactly.
It forces you to act before the rationalizing part of your brain can boot up and construct the excuse.
Precisely. You are riding the wave of immediate emotional motivation before the brain can hit the brakes.
Okay, so we've spent a lot of time on building new pathways and adding positive habits.
We have.
But what about the habits we already have wired in?
The bad ones, you mean?
Right. If the brain is this malleable to positive dopamine hits, what does that mean for the negative habits that constantly hold us back? Are they playing by the same chemical rules?
They are playing by the exact same rules, which is why trying to just stop a bad habit using willpower almost never works.
It's just too deeply wired.
Right. The text emphasizes a critical reality. You cannot simply suppress a bad habit. It is neurologically unsustainable.
The old self-help analogy is usually holding a beach ball underwater.
Yeah, I've heard that one.
But that always felt a bit simplistic to me. To me, using willpower to suppress a bad habit feels more like trying to win a game of whack-a-mole that is plugged into a single power strip.
Oh, I like that.
You can't just keep hitting the moles. You're going to exhaust yourself, and eventually you'll miss one. You have to literally unplug the machine and plug in a completely different game.
I think that captures the dynamic perfectly. When you just try to suppress a behavior, the neural craving for the reward is still firing.
You're still playing the same game.
Exactly. Instead, you have to replace it. This is dopamine substitution. You replace the negative habit with a positive tiny habit that provides a similar feeling.
Okay, walk me through what that substitution actually looks like in a daily routine.
Let's take checking your phone obsessively, which is, a massive one for most people.
Oh, absolutely. Guilty of that one.
Usually we do that because we want a quick mental break, or we're seeking a tiny hit of dopamine to relieve stress.
Right.
If you just tell yourself, I'm going to stop checking my phone, you are actively creating more stress.
Which actually triggers the craving further.
Exactly. Telling yourself not to think about the phone makes you hyper-aware of it.
So what do you do?
So instead of suppression, you substitute. When you feel that familiar urge to grab your device, you use that urge as your new anchor.
Ah, okay.
The routine changes. You take 1 minute to practice deep breathing, or you read a single paragraph of an article.
So you're keeping the cue and you're keeping the reward of a mental break, but you are just swapping out the routine in the middle.
Yes, and this naturally brings us to perhaps the most profound realization of this entire methodology. When you start swapping these routines, even on a microscopic level, habits cease to be just actions. They become the building blocks of who we are.
So they fundamentally shape our identity.
Exactly.
Because if I'm plugging in a new game every day, eventually I'm just a person who plays a different game.
That is the core of self-perception theory. We gather evidence about who we are based on our own actions.
So if you do a 5-minute daily exercise consistently, you are no longer someone who is trying to be active.
Right. By definition, because you are engaging in the activity daily, you literally become an active person.
It's an internal identity shift. You aren't faking it until you make it. You are proving it to yourself with indisputable daily evidence.
Exactly. And we really can't overlook how this identity shift is heavily accelerated by social belonging.
Oh, right. The community aspect.
Yeah. When you surround yourself with family, friends, or even online communities who share these tiny habits, it reinforces that new identity.
Because we're social creatures.
Yes, stepping into a new identity is so much easier when you have a community reflecting that new reality back to you.
So if you're listening to this right now, how does reading one page or doing a 5-minute walk actually change your life in a tangible way?
It seems like it wouldn't matter, right?
Exactly. Because the math of tiny seems like it would take decades to actually move the needle. does it?
It truly does. The compounding ripple effect of these tiny habits is where the real transformation happens.
Okay, let's break that down. The research outlines how this impacts three major domains: health, productivity, and relationships. Let's start with the physical side. How does health compound?
Well, think about a foundation. A 5-minute daily walk, a commitment to drinking 1 glass of water after brushing your teeth, doing a single minute of breathing exercises. They don't seem like much on day one,
No, not at all.
but over months and years, they completely alter your physical and mental baseline. You are continually raising the floor of your health.
And without ever feeling like you're enduring a grueling regimen.
Exactly. And productivity is the same way.
Oh man, I think the modern workforce is entirely defined by overwhelm. We have to-do lists that are just pages long.
And the solution to that overwhelm is the exact same mechanism. Shrink it down.
Shrink the to-do list.
Yes. There's a psychological principle called the Zeigarnik effect.
The Zeigarnik effect. What's that?
It essentially means uncompleted tasks take up cognitive load and cause stress. By keeping your to-do list incredibly short, you reduce that load.
Ah, that makes sense.
Commit to checking your email for just 5 minutes at the start of the day to clear the immediate noise, rather than getting lost in it for an hour.
Or taking one single minute to outline the very next step of a project before you dive in.
Exactly. These tiny interventions dramatically reduce the friction of starting, which skyrockets your actual work performance.
That's amazing. Now, the domain that genuinely caught me off guard in this research was relationships.
Oh, it's such a beautiful application of the theory.
Because we usually think of habits as these solitary individual pursuits, like me in the gym, or me reading a book in silence. How do tiny habits apply to our social wiring and other people?
It is actually one of the most powerful applications of the entire framework. Relationships do not thrive on grand, rare gestures.
So it's not the expensive anniversary trip once a year.
No, they thrive on consistent micro moments of connection. It's the Tuesday morning interactions.
That makes a lot of sense.
Think about the tiny actions that sustain a bond. Sending one daily message of appreciation to a friend.
Or committing to the tiny habit of taking a physical breath and listening deeply without interrupting when a colleague speaks to you.
Yes. When you make a tiny habit of expressing appreciation, you are constantly feeding the relationship. You build incredibly strong, sustainable trust.
Because the other person consistently feels valued.
Exactly. And again, it reinforces your identity. You become a thoughtful friend or a supportive partner because you are doing the daily actions that prove it.
It really all comes back to that compounding effect. Small actions, repeated over time, create massive structural changes in our brains and our lives.
They absolutely do. If we synthesize the core philosophy here, true, lasting change requires continuous tiny steps.
Right.
It is never about being perfect, and it is certainly never about relying on willpower.
So true.
It is about consistency, it's about being flexible when the system breaks, and it's about empowering yourself by reshaping your daily routines in ways that actually work with your biology.
Rather than fighting against it.
Exactly.
It just takes all the pressure off. You do not have to be a superhero to change your life. You just have to be willing to start incredibly small, anchor it to something you already do, and celebrate the fact that you showed up.
You are quite literally redesigning your environment and your neurochemistry to make success inevitable.
Well, as we wrap up today's deep dive into the architecture of our daily lives, I want to leave you with a final, lingering question to ponder.
Okay, let's hear it.
We've talked about how every tiny habit is essentially a piece of evidence, a vote for the person you are becoming. So think about your own morning tomorrow. What does the very first thing you do tomorrow morning say about your new identity?
Wow. That is a profound thought to take into the rest of the day.
It really is. Thank you so much for listening and sharing your time with us today.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
And hey, if you enjoyed this journey and you want more insights that fit right into your busy schedule, please don't forget to hit subscribe on BookSnap. We absolutely love unpacking these concepts with you, and we'll see you in the next deep dive.